welcome to Beyond. We're on location at Anaheim Stadium in support of Strikeout Slavery. We have a very special guest, Harmony Grillo, who's a survivor of commercial sexual exploitation. Take us back on your journey. How did you get caught up in human exploitation?
Yeah, so like a lot of survivors of exploitation and trafficking, I have a history of childhood sexual abuse and then also poverty. So there were a lot of vulnerabilities in my background that left me more susceptible. One of my abusers was my mother's boyfriend, and at that point I was 13 and I ran away from home to get away from the situation. And she called me up and she said, "He's gone now, you can come back." And I came back, and then she actually ended up leaving me at 13 with my 8-year-old brother to be with my abuser. And so she left us for 3 months with $20 and a book of food stamps. And obviously the money and food stamps didn't last long, so I started stealing from the liquor store to support my brother and I. And it was that summer that I became really susceptible to a relationship with someone who ultimately became my exploiter. And at 19, I was working in strip clubs under his control, and he started using me to recruit other women and just was really stuck in that life.
So as you had this sort of gradual progression, I mean, your mother, it's being introduced at some level with your mother, the abuse, and what a man is in your home and what that looks like, and that seems normalized now, and it's not.
Absolutely.
Did you know that you were being exploited, or were you more tricked into human trafficking? Was it based on your need at the time?
So I didn't see it as exploitation at the time, and you know, the way it started is, here I am stealing food, and when he was around, he would take us to Burger King and buy us food. And you know, I was in this very violent neighborhood where there was an active gang war between the two gangs that occupied my neighborhood, gunshots every night. And he would come around and say, "I've got your back, I'll take care of you, I'm gonna protect you." And that's all I ever wanted from a male figure, was to feel provided and protected.
Right.
Provided for and protected. And so I became really attached to him in what I now know is a trauma bond. I didn't see it as exploitation. You know, the way it was kind of pitched to me is like, you just do this for a little while and then you can get out. We'll just save up some money, pay some bills. It's you and me against the world, you know.
So like, you help me, I'll help you.
Right, and then, a couple months turned into a few years, and just really was trapped and didn't see any way out.
How did you, I think for anybody watching this, the idea that this is your normal experience, right? How did you cope with an experience that you're caught up in?
Well, it's not a coincidence that up to 90% of victims of sexual exploitation have a history of childhood sexual abuse. Because a history of childhood sexual abuse taught me to be comfortable with being sexualized and objectified, and a sense of powerlessness over my body. And being willing to be sexualized and objectified are job requirements in the commercial sex industry. And that powerlessness over my body was also something that I needed in the club. And also I learned, as a coping mechanism, dissociation. I knew how to disconnect myself from my circumstances. And so going into exploitation, that was one of the main coping mechanisms I employed, was just, I lived in a state of disconnection.
Sort of like compartmentalization, where you can just disconnect from, and
I was like The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not like the TV show, but like, no, right, that's different. That's a different reference now. But like, I wasn't alive. I was dead.
Yeah, and I've heard that many times from people that have gone through that journey, whether it's prostitution or sexual exploitation.
Yeah.
It's a similar refrain, that I'm just dead inside.
Totally.
I'm going through the motions, and at some level drugs involved or alcohol's involved, or some medications involved, just to deal with the trauma that's really happening. Right, at some level there's some trauma going on, but you're at where you're at, you need to survive, you have your brother, and you have this sort of quid pro quo going on, something for something.
And denial, telling yourself it's not that bad, it could be worse, you know?
Yeah, rationalization, justification. Did you ever fear for your life in this period of time?
Yeah, I honestly didn't think I would live to see 21. I thought if I didn't take myself out, someone else was gonna do it. It just, violence was a part of my norm.
So when you started, was it 14 you started this journey?
In this particular situation, it began with him having me commit crimes. And when I was 18, I didn't want to do it anymore because I didn't want to risk going to prison and having a permanent record. And so that's when the commercial sex industry became the
And if you're in your mind saying, I'm not going to make it to 21, there must be some really uncertain, violent themes life-altering, life-stopping things going on, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And you know, women in the commercial sex industry and victims of trafficking experience post-traumatic stress disorder at rates equivalent to combat war veterans. And that is one of the symptoms of PTSD, is that looming feeling that you're going to die and that you're not going to make it. Yeah.
What would you tell young girls that, you know, believe that something like this could never happen to them? Because there's people from higher income families, lower, I think it hits every strata.
Right.
What would you say to those girls?
I mean, it honestly can happen to anyone. The most vulnerable are the most susceptible, but I have a friend who was recruited off a college campus and her life threatened and she was forced into trafficking. And so it really can happen to anyone. And what I would say is, and this is from Maya Angelou, who I love, but when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. So when someone shows you with their actions that they are not trustworthy and they're not safe, believe them, you know, and get out.
So what kind of picture could you paint of the horror that is human trafficking and sexual exploitation?
It takes so many different forms that it's difficult to paint just one picture of it. I mean, because we haven't even talked about labor trafficking. There's labor trafficking. There's, you know, children who are trafficked. There's just it takes so many different faces, and there are different forms, different types of exploiters. There are the Romeo pimps who use the tactics like my exploiter did, the promise of love and romance and we can be together. But there are also what's known as, my friend Rachel Thomas coined this term, CEO pimps, who use, you're going to be a model and I'm going to help you manage your career as the entry point to recruit women. But then you also have the guerrilla pimps who use brute force and violence and torture. So I can't paint one picture of it because it takes on so many different faces. But at the end of the day, it's turning people into products and dehumanizing.
Right. Which I think pornography does a great job of. A lot of our mass media does a great job of. The idea that people are just things and tools to an end. And I think that happens in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Given that less than 1% of these women are rescued, how was it you were able to get out and free from sexual exploitation?
It was one person who reached out to me. One person who showed me unconditional love and showed me a way out. And I think that's so important because the truth is that this issue can be so overwhelming once our eyes are open and we're faced with the reality. It is overwhelming, but not one of us can do everything, but everyone can do something. And really it's from person to person, figuring out what's in my hand, what can I do? So maybe you are that one person who encounters someone who's been a victim of exploitation and trafficking. Reaching out to that one life can make a huge difference, right? Or maybe you're someone who has a platform, a voice, like the pool holes are doing today. They're using their platform and their voice to bring this message into baseball stadiums and to educate the public. And so what's in your hand? Everyone can do something.
Great. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome.
I appreciate your story.
Thank you so much.
Hi, we are joined now with Juan Reveles. He's part of the Anaheim Police Department Task Force on Human Trafficking, and I believe also the Orange County Task Force on Human Trafficking. And he'll talk about his role in trying to combat human trafficking within Orange County and actually other parts of California. Juan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So in your role, when did this role get started for you?
So for me, it was when this multi-agency team was created in 2014. And pretty much the police chiefs in Orange County realized that this human trafficking problem, not only is it here in Orange County, but it's to a degree that no small department, no single department can handle it. So therefore the multi-agency team was created.
So there's obviously funding that's been directed, a special task force that's been established.
Correct.
Because the problem is so large. Is it just in Orange County or does it touch Los Angeles, San Diego,
It's an absolute national crisis is what it comes down to. And if you were to think of like, if it's happening in Orange County, that we believe such a conservative, very affluent community by and large as we compare to other counties, if it's happening here, every other county is suffering from it in California.
Wow. So as you think about the problem, do you guys coordinate with other police forces nationally in terms of the information on perpetrators or victims, or how do you collaborate?
So absolutely. So it all depends what the case is about. By and large part, the vast majority are all California girls that are being brought to Orange County. we're pretty much the demand county. A lot of it is because, as I mentioned before, it's seen as an affluent county, and rightly so. So the traffickers and pimps bring their victims here because this is where they're going to make the most money. Yes, right. That's where the money's at.
Are these victims coming outside the United States, or are they all homegrown victims in the United States?
So in 5 years, the victims that are being victimized, whether it's on the street or on the hotels, they've all been national victims. The majority of them from California. So there are girls. Some come up from the surrounding states as it relates to the street. Now, when we're talking about illegal massage parlors, that's when you talk about the foreign nationals. But this misperception or misconception from the general public that it's something like the movies, in 5 years, I've yet to run into a foreign national being worked on the street or these hotels. They're all our national victims.
And are these victims like only lower socioeconomic, or do they cover the gambit of the socioeconomic spectrum?
Well, by and large part they are, but it's not a social thing. It's more of their situation at home. All of the victims that we run across, as far as my task is concerned, they have a, oh, hold on.
Hold on.
Sorry about that.
That's important. I'm sorry, what was the question I asked?
It was the lower socioeconomic.
Yeah. So is it really related to the home environment, I guess, or?
It's that double combination of lower socioeconomics and trouble at home. It's a recipe for disaster for these victims to be out there, and they're just vulnerable to be recruited by these traffickers that are master predators because they go find them.
Right.
And these are usually what age women or girls that are being trafficked?
Well, I can tell you the youngest we found working the street so far, 13 years old. 13. As it relates to juveniles, they're in that 15, 16 range. And then obviously adults in the 18 to 30-year range, somewhere around there, top end.
So is your job really about the victim or the perpetrator, or a combination?
It's actually a combination of both. And this is what is switching. This is the big change for law enforcement, is what we call a victim-centered approach, which means we start our investigations with the assumption that they are a victim, because already experience has shown us that by in large part, most of them have a controller, whether a pimp or a trafficker. So it is that approach. But yeah, we're the officers. We got to go find him and bring him to justice. And as I mentioned to you prior, when it involves a juvenile and they touched anywhere Orange County, we're going to go anywhere in the state to find you. If you go out of the state, this is when we partner with our federal partners. That gives us a broader reach. The point remains, you are going to come to Orange County.
So when you have these girls come in and you are able to rescue them, I know there's a case in 2014, I don't remember her name, but a girl came into one of the programs, was rescued, but then her pimp called her up and said, if you don't come back out, your family's going to be impacted.
Right.
And so she left and she ended up dead the next morning in Yorba Linda, I believe.
Yeah.
So when you get these victims, what tools and laws and abilities do you have to really keep them off the street and protected from their pimps?
All right, so I don't call them rescued because they don't act like they're being rescued. They don't want to be a victim. They don't want your help. That's entirely different. It's a mindset for officers. I identify and locate them. And then when I do that, the best thing that I can do for her, even though she doesn't want it, is to put a case together against that trafficker. Because when he's in jail with a very high bail, he's not going to find her. The fact that they leave back with them, that is no surprise at all. We assume they're going to leave placement. We assume they're going to be involved in being trafficked again. It's just their mindset. So that doesn't dissuade us anymore. Because remember, law enforcement, we are not really in the business of convincing people they're victims because there's so many victims out there that want our help.
Right.
And that's why we have to take this victim-centered approach. If you want to think about what something is changing law enforcement, it's changing that paradigm shift into dealing from this perspective.
That's got to be tough. You're trying to help people that don't see themselves as a victim, and yet they're traumatized in ways they can't imagine. And so, I guess because of their age, you're motivated. I'm sure you have kids, so you got to be motivated. Like they don't know what they don't know, but our job is to help them the best we can.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what you just said, they don't know what they don't know. We know they're being victimized, but that same approach, we don't keep it at juveniles. when we speak to a 23-year-old adult, right, and she's exhibiting the same behavior toward us, think about it, we're like, well, you're an adult, you're making decisions. But when she starts her story and we say, how did you get into life? When did all this start? And she says, when I was 13, when I was 14, when I was 15. Chronologically, we're talking to an adult. But they've been in this so far. So it's really having that understanding and knowing that our goal is the perpetrator by helping her. It's the best way we can do it because they are going to go back to it. That's the best chance we have at it.
Now, as a law enforcement professional, obviously you hear about these sad stories and these victims, but yet you have resources that you can pull from to help place these girls and get them the help they need. So talk us a little bit through what does that look like if somebody is a sex trafficking victim and you get that person, what resources do you have at your disposal to help that person out?
That's a great question because as I talk about what I do, it's only one component of this task force that exists here in Orange County. It's this collaborative 5 core members. So you have law enforcement and district attorney's office. We have to be on the same page for our cases we bring for them to prosecute. At the same time, you have the victim advocates. They have to be on the same page with us. In fact, they're the ones leading this charge in this victim-centered approach that we had to learn from them. And then you have social services. They have to be in play because of all the juveniles that we find. They're the ones that once we find a juvenile, it is now their jurisdiction to find out, hey, when you're coming up here from upstate, where are we going to send you back to? What's been happening? So they do all that investigation. And then you have probation as well because some of them have some criminal history because they've been bruised or they've been arrested in the past for this and like that. So that's the core members of this task force. And then what you get to see right now, which is really cool, is you get to see how we're surrounded by a community of all of these NGOs that are saying, okay, you guys are doing this, all these gaps in services. There's so many things I can do. I mean, I go arrest people, but I can't provide services. Right. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have the hard job of trying to put you back together. So that's what you're seeing right now. So it's perfect. It's the first interview I've done where you can visually go see what this task force looks like. Yeah, it's this is a little piece of it. Yeah. All of us working together to say what's the best we can do for this victim that was found today. And that's where we all come here, and that's our strength here in Orange County.
What does strikeout slavery mean to you?
You know, it's actually a pretty cool thing because the biggest hurdle 5 years ago was to convince Orange County that this is an issue and that it's here. Okay? And at the same time, think about it this way. There's 3 people involved in that. You have the trafficker, the victim, but you have the purchaser. Okay? And I've yet to run into a female purchaser. So who's the demand? Males are. Right? But there's some males that are way beyond that. Why don't we start like everything else for the victim? Let's start some prevention way back. Let's start with the males way back. Hey, don't contribute to this by being a purchaser, right? So this awareness campaign like today, it's not just about the victims. Where's there you're gonna find the most young boys around baseball? What a concept. It's just the tag name strikeout slavery. That's what it means to me. It's like, here, let's talk about it. It's happening. It's good for the victims, it's good for the perpetrators. I don't want this juvenile that says, I think I'm going to do this. No, this awareness campaign. Right. And also the future customers, I don't want that either. So, I mean, we're at the tip of what I would like to see where we're at 10 years from now with this approach. So yeah, strikeout slavery, when you can put this at an event with 25,000 people all at once, I'll take that any second because we go around and I do a lot of talking, but nothing like this. Nothing like this. Nothing like this. And so therefore, Deidre and her organization and what she's trying to do for us, it's like fuel on this fire we had going. She just poured a ton of gasoline and then she took it at a national level.
And it's beautiful to see that she's using the stage and what she's been given and leveraging that. MLB, Major League Baseball, and the contacts, connections. It's so encouraging to see her get involved and use the platform for social good. So,
but it's more than that. It's her passion, and she took no for an answer.
Right.
That's this task force. We're where we're at because we've never taken no for an answer. We pushed it. So if somebody comes in at that level with that, with the national spotlight and has the same passion, I mean, you can't beat that. No, I mean, I'm here and you get to see what it looks like just 3 years later. Not only that, 3 teams this year as opposed to the single year in 2017. So it is going to continue to grow.
And the goal is to get 30 teams, I believe.
Yep, absolutely. Because, look, we're at the tip of this. Communities, states, the cities recognizing that it happened here, we're there. But even here in Orange County after 5 years, I still run across people in Newport Beach, Irvine, San Juan, even like, I've never heard about this. Well, because there's 3.4 billion people, and for as big as we think we are, we're a small team.
Right.
That's why I'm appreciative of these opportunities.
Sure.
And I take it every time I can, put the word out there.
Thanks, Juan. So if I'm if somebody's a victim of trafficking, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, for us here, you call your local police department because it's, people send them out to the national hotline. Call your local police department. It's the fastest way it's going to get to me or one of the other teams that are around here, because we work that well together. I mean, we're always in contact, and if anywhere it occurs, we're on it right away. So call your local police department. It's the best thing you can do because it eliminates one step for us. Get back here. This county is very, very coordinated. I'm very proud to say that.
All right. Juan, thanks for coming on.
No, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hi, we're joined by Lita Mercado, and she's with Waymakers, and she's the director of the Victims Assistance Program. We just heard from Juan where the police force, the police agencies will get a call on the victims, and when the victims come to the police department, the handoff usually goes to Lita and her team. Lita, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. So we're all again part of the Strike Out Slavery here at Anaheim Stadium. And I believe this is what year? How many years you've been?
It's the third year.
Third year. I'm sure you've seen it grow.
We have seen it grow. The first year it was only the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, and this year it's come to 3 stadiums across Major League Baseball.
And that's huge. It's a great platform. So when you have a victim or when you get the call from Juan, walk us through that process. What does that look like for the victim, who it's probably a little bit intimidating to be with the police force and all that that represents, and you got pulled out. We know that they're handlers or they're pimps. It's a violent world, and they're money makers. And so now they've been pulled out of that, and now they're looking at where do I go? So where do you come into that process?
Yeah, so Juan and company, they'll give us a call. We show up 24 hours, 7 days a week. We typically show up to the police department. I don't know if Juan already told you, but at Anaheim Police Department, they set up a soft room. So instead of interviewing victims in a cold room with a bar for handcuffs, it's a room that our volunteers help put together. It's got couches, it's painted blue, stuffed animals, magazines. It's very comfortable. So the victims know that this is not their typical law enforcement experience. This is here, victim-centered, trauma-informed. So we walk into the room when the law enforcement department is done, and we introduce ourselves. We say we work for a nonprofit. We're here for the victim and the victim only, and help assess what their needs are. And oftentimes it's basic. They haven't had a meal in 2 days. They haven't had a bottle of water in 3 days. They need a place to stay for the night because their perpetrator just got detained and now is in jail. They don't live here. They don't have family here. They don't know anybody here, which is part of why their perpetrators are bringing them here, to help ensure that they have no place to go. So it's simple basics, and after we get them set up in some of our emergency housing or shelter services with our partners, then we're able to get a better assessment of what's next for them. Do they want to stay here and need social support and counseling? Do they want to go back home to Colorado or Fresno? And if that's the case, which is often the case, they want to go back home. Orange County is a destination location. So they want to go back home, but they can't. They don't have IDs, so they can't get on a plane. They have no money. So we start working on getting those very basic things happening. And at the same time that we're meeting those basic needs, we're validating and confirming, doing crisis counseling, like listening to what's happening and letting them know it's not their fault, and that there's people like ourselves all across this country who are providing services that this is what we want to do. We want to help support them in whatever their next steps look like.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. That's amazing what you do for these people that have got to be really distressed, stressed, depressed, and everything that goes into that mental component. So, do you find that these victims want to speak to their parents, want to reconnect with their family?
So that's a great question.
Or do they have a family to reconnect with?
Often they have a social support person somewhere. Probably not super healthy, but they do have somebody that they can connect with. What we're finding is that unlike domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims, these victims, the human trafficking is just the most recent bad thing that has happened to them, right? Often they're child abuse victims, sexual assault victims. They've been in and out of foster care. And so the perpetrators of human trafficking are very strategic. They're not looking for...
They're very clever.
Yeah, they're not looking for people with social support systems and all this great grounding abilities, right? They're looking for people who've been running away from foster systems and don't have anyone, and they can swoop in and be that someone for that person. And it's like domestic violence on steroids, right? They have all of this power and control over this person, and they can tell them, and in many cases, often true, I'm the only one who cares about you. And
that's pretty powerful.
It is pretty powerful. And unfortunately, what that caring looks like is incredibly abusive. I think everyday folks imagine maybe it's tough, but don't actually realize that these perpetrators are violent criminals. I mean, they are committing overt acts of violence. Oftentimes they're gang members, they're murderers, they're rapists, and this is just another way that they make money. And this is what that 17-year-old is dealing with, or that 20-year-old, or that 13-year-old who we have rescued here in Orange County.
So they got to be in abject fear for their life that if they mess up or do something untoward or that's not within the agreement of their handler, they could be dead.
They can be. And it's an interesting dynamic between fear and the fear of the unknown. So if you have an 18-year-old who's been on the streets and has nobody because she's been in the foster care system, she's been abused perhaps by someone in the foster care system, and she's with this person who's committing all these acts of violence, if she has this opportunity through a law enforcement identification, she still might struggle with what to do because it's between the devil she knows and the devil she doesn't know. Like, she already knows how this game is played. She already knows if she meets her quota, she can sleep that night. She knows what she needs to do to get fed. And if she takes our help, she doesn't know how that's going to play out, and that can be really, really hard.
So their handler's in jail, but the handler gets out of jail. And do these girls you rescue really have a choice if they're working with you guys? Do you give them the ability to have anonymity and relocate them where their pimp can't find them? I mean, are there safeguards in place where if they took that step with you, that they have some assurances that it'll turn out okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So assurances, no. But we have a lot of capability here in Orange County. We're state funded, federally funded. We have donors as a nonprofit. So we have the ability to put people in housing. We have the ability to relocate someone to a whole other state. We work with the Safe at Home program, which allows people to protect their residents and keep it private so no one knows where they live. So we have the ability to do those things. It's just, that's a big commitment for somebody who doesn't know what it's going to be like on that other end. And we have found these girls, most of them are girls that we're identifying, we have found that they don't have a lot of even just simple grounding techniques. Like when things go awry, no one's taught them how to do simple things like take a deep breath,
no human
have
skills,
some intro, have some retrospect, like put it in context. They just know they've never had that conversation before, and so it's really, really hard. We provide victim services to victims of all crimes, surviving family members of homicide, gang violence. I mean, all run the gamut, anything bad that can happen to you. Waymakers can provide services. And human trafficking, those victims are this perfect storm and are the hardest for them to be able to pull out of it, because these traffickers really have strategically picked, like, this is the person that even if somebody walked in and said, hey, we can help you get out of it, they're not going to jump and run to us and say, oh, thank goodness you're here. They may think...
And part of it, right, do they think they're really a victim?
Yeah.
This is what they know. This is their being. This is,
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes that's what our work looks like when we have a young girl who's willing to take our services but isn't happy about what's happening. She's not happy that her boyfriend is in custody. But she's allowing us to provide support for her, and we help her to hear what's going on. Like, we'll ask questions about what's good about this situation. And we do. It's not uncommon for her to say things like, well, I make a lot of money and he loves me. And so we'll say, great, so let's talk about how much money you make. She'll say, I can make $6,000 in one night. And we're like, great, what do you buy with that $6,000? Well, We get McDonald's, and every once in a while we could stay at a Quality Inn instead of a Motel 6. And like we help them to hear that you're not making $6,000 a night. He's making $6,000 a night. You don't eat unless he tells you to, and you eat what he gives you. They don't buy anything, but they've just been so conditioned in this. And part of it is because people are surviving. You know, you have to survive, and so your mind will help make sense of a situation. And it's not until those conversations that they realize, yeah, you're right, I don't make $6,000.
And part of the problem, as I see it, if they're being trafficked at 12 and 13, 14, they're not developing mentally and emotionally as normal kids that age going through high school with a two-parent family or at least a loving environment would be able to understand and process at a deeper level. So now you're taking girls that really almost have stalled in their development, and maybe they're 17, 18, 19, and they're kind of in this time warp, and they can't get out of that.
Absolutely, and that's critical. And that's also another thing. We've come across victims who are 25, 26 years old, and older.
But with the mentality of what?
Yeah, that's never been their first time, right? Their first time that they were involved in commercial sex with a pimp who's forcing them to do it has always, 100% of the time, been as a kid. So it's not what I think lots of people imagine is adult women looking for a way to make money, hooking up with someone as a business relationship, and being able to pay their bills. I think that's what has made it so successful as an industry, is the rest of us see it as just prostitution. And then here in Orange County, at least in 2004, we educated ourselves and we joined with law enforcement and helped train ourselves. And we started asking questions and found out, oh, she's not doing this because she wants to. She's not making any money.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that anybody in America could say a 12, 13, 14-year-old is in prostitution by choice is nuts. I mean, they're victims that are forced, coerced, whatever, and they have no ability to really make good, rational choices as an adult.
Yeah.
So the idea that it's prostitution is really the wrong term to use. They're victims.
It really is, and we do some distinction here in Orange County because prostitution does exist.
Sure.
There are people making money, consenting, and paying their bills. And here in Orange County, when it's identified, it's dealt with as such. And even law enforcement is still giving them resources, like, hey, if you ever need any help, here's some folks that you could call. But 9 times out of 10, that's not what we're finding. We all thought that's what it was. Or if we see bruises or something physical, we're making the assumption that the sex purchasers have been doing that. That's not what's happening. It's their handlers who are doling out punishments, making sure that the power and control is secure. And once we discovered that, we can't unsee it, right? All of us that do the work, we can walk around in a space or troll around on social media and we see it. I've seen some YouTube videos where they do some funny things about what kids text to their parents. And that was something I saw recently. And there was a text that they were making fun of and it was hilarious. But I read that text on my iPad and I was like, that's not a kid. That's probably a 20-year-old talking to her pimp. She used the term daddy and some other key human trafficking
And you're
terms.
trained to see that, though.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
Yeah. And so now you can't unsee it and you really see this is really prevalent. And it's prevalent here in Orange County, which I think is why strikeout slavery and movements like this
is
are
critical. Because money drives it.
Yeah.
It's people that are really wealthy, people with means that go that direction. So we hope that they would consider not doing that, obviously. But Lita, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Great
Appreciate
conversation.
it.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.